Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLaughlin.
I'm Erica Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Midlife Unfiltered. I'm Erica Webb, and of course you all know my co-host Anita McLaughlin, who actually isn't with me today, but I know she is here in spirit. I am introducing part 2 of our Women's Stories series. So in this episode, I am speaking with 3 women about their quite different menopause transition stories. I am chatting with Tina, who's in her 50s, Cynthia, who's in her 40s, and Natalya, who is in her 30s and actually went through the menopause transition in her 20s due to a surgical procedure. So if you haven't listened to part 1 of this episode where Anita was talking with Lyndall and Liz, you might want to go back to that episode first because it creates a lot of context for why we're having these conversations. And, you know, those stories are really awesome and you definitely want to make sure that you hear them. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go back to part 1. You can totally listen to this one first if you want to, but there's a little bit of context setting in part 1 that isn't here in part 2. All right, I reckon we should just dive in. So my first conversation in this episode is with Tina. And Tina is in her 50s and she went through the menopause transition, and you're going to hear about her story and her experiences with hormone replacement therapy, her struggles with sleep. I think there's a lot to dig into here and I know you're going to love it.
Tina Tang, I'm 53. I'll be 54 in a few months, and I am postmenopause. I was officially postmenopause probably at 50. I think because you're postmenopause when you're officially 1 year not having your period. So yeah, 50.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know what happened, I guess, through your menopause transition. Wherever you want to start, whichever parts you want to share, you know, story time if you're willing.
Sure. I think I talk a lot about it on my social and support women in this time of life because I went through it completely not even knowing that that's what it was. It probably started when I was around 47, like when I think back to it, because my period started changing where I thought something was wrong. I was literally getting my period every 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks.
What?
So what, And usually if you think, like you would probably think menopause, because when they say menopause, it starts spreading out. But prior to being postmenopause, I didn't know that it also means you can also just get your period every 2 or 3 weeks. So when I went to the gynecologist, they're like, oh, maybe you have polyps. Let's examine and see if that's, let's do a little ultrasound and everything. And the gynecologist at the time, it's so funny because when I think about it now, I'm like, it is literally the classic age to be going through perimenopause. I mean, they can probably do tests, but it blows my mind that wasn't even a possibility that was in their thought. So I ended up having some, what do they call it? Basically, they inpatient or outpatient surgery. So they try to remove polyps. And then the doctor that did the polyp removal was like, I didn't find anything. So I was like, okay, this is still disturbing because my period was still very irregular. And then I think around 48, 49, I had gone to visit my parents during the summer. And the first night that I was there, I couldn't fall asleep, like literally just wired, couldn't fall asleep. So like, okay, it's just sometimes that happens, you can't fall asleep. And then the next night, I assumed that I would be able to fall asleep. And then I couldn't. And it just became this, it was horrible because you start to become very panicked about it because also late at night when you can't fall asleep, I catastrophize, and I think actually most people do. You're like, oh my God, I'm gonna be exhausted tomorrow. My whole day's shot. What if this keeps happening? It's already like 3 days. I'm gonna get dementia when I get older. Just all the thoughts, like all the things that you can think about. So I started having a lot of sleep issues where I had to go through the periods like 7 days where it felt like I wasn't sleeping. So maybe I was getting a few hours, but you know how when you're
Mm.
in that state of insomnia, if you fall asleep, you can't really tell how much, but you just, you're waking up early, and it is the most horrible thing. You realize why sleep deprivation is a torture device in the military,
Yeah.
because you just feel you're out of sorts the next day, and it just keeps going on. And the longer that happens, it almost becomes, actually, it doesn't almost, it becomes psychological, where you start overthinking it, trying to do everything to chase sleep. And for all the sleep behavioral psychologists, chasing sleep is the thing that makes you not sleep. It's like
Yes.
anything you obsess over. It's like dieting. You keep focusing on the calories, you just keep eating because you're thinking too much about food and not like a normal eater. And then for sleep,
Mhm.
you're not a normal sleeper because you just start trying to find all the hacks. Let me turn the lights a certain way. I'm going to go to bed earlier, and then you're lying in bed. So when I went to my gynecologist, same one, he basically said, "Oh, that's just part of this age. You just have to suck it off." And
Oh.
that was so unhelpful. And I went to my primary care provider, also a guy. Neither of them thought to even suggest that it might be perimenopause, even though that then I was like 49. And it is a very classic symptom of perimenopause. In fact, I think 50% of women, something like that, the statistics
Wow.
have sleep issues in this stage. So neither of them suggested that. And my primary care provider was like, "Oh, you can try meditation and you can try this." And I was like, "Yes, sure. But I just want to get to sleep now." So I was like, "Is there anything else I can do?" And he said, "Well, I mean, I don't suggest you take this every night, but I can prescribe Ambien." And I was like, "Okay." But I don't know if you've ever taken a pill like that, but it helps you fall asleep. And then
Mm.
once you have it, you're like the next night, you can try not to have it, but the idea of sleep is just so sweet. Let me
Yes.
just take it again. And he didn't say this to me. I only knew this because I became addicted to it. Addicted as in you feel like you can't go to sleep without it. And you do feel like a drug addict in that it's a regulated drug where you only get an X amount of pills and it can't be renewed until a certain date. So this is when you know you've got a problem. So if let's say you drop your container of pills and then they spill it, then you start scrambling like, "Oh my God, if I'm one less, it's one
Mhm.
less night of sleep." So I started trying to figure out, how am I going to be able to sleep again? Because this is not a long-term solution. I was trying to research different met methods. There's books out there to teach you how to sleep. So I ended up going with a CBTI,
Mhm.
cognitive behavioral therapist that just does insomnia. And I learned that there is a whole field where these doctors, they're psychologists or therapists, they only deal with sleep issues, nothing else. They won't talk to you about your problems. They just basically they're sleep coaches. And through working with him, and it was virtual because this is around the pandemic, so we would
Mm.
meet once a week, or then it becomes once every other week, on basically training your brain how not to be obsessed with sleep. And so eventually I got to a point where my sleep, I wouldn't say it was normal, it got much better. As a side note, the American College of Physicians recommends for insomnia, I don't know why all doctors, the number one treatment should always be going to CBTI, not any
Ah.
other. So but the thing is, I'm sure a lot of people don't necessarily go because I'm sure insurance doesn't necessarily cover, because I just paid out of pocket,
Mm.
and doctors probably don't know. So the one piece of advice that I always give to every woman that I encounter, or when I create content in my socials, like the number one thing you need during this time, at least in the States, is a menopause certified doctor. Because even though everyone's a doctor, most of them are not educated in menopause. And then in doing the research, they talk about it, even in med school, they might have 1 hour of their whole course, the whole time that covers menopause, but they can go into to OB-GYN as like a specialty. There's nothing for women over past menopause and
Yeah.
postmenopause. So there's statistics about how there's a high percentage of doctors who are not comfortable in guiding patients about that because they just didn't learn about it. So in the States, there's a organization called the North American Menopause Society. It's a nonprofit that provides education and certifications to doctors. And based on like even doctors that I've interviewed, there's one that is local that I've interviewed on my podcast. And she actually told me, she goes, the testing is quite rigorous. She's like, you can't just like take a course and pass. Like they have to read the whole coursework and they have to study to pass the test. And then they are always current on the new guidelines and everything. So that's not a lot of doctors are that. So I think for every woman in the States, when they're looking, if they're not feeling like their doctor understands or they're being written off, um, feel like the doctor thinks they're exaggerating, like you just go to that website. They have a directory by state. You can put in your zip code and you can find a doctor who is fully educated on what's going on and will give you options.
Mm.
Uh, I think the other thing I want to talk about, the HRT is, I did try that too before I went. As I was starting with the CBTI practitioner, I was like, let me try hormone therapy. And the doctor I had at that time, I ended up firing him. His response, I said, should I try hormone therapy? He's like, no, you shouldn't. He just told me it causes cancer. That's what he was saying. It causes cancer. Well, all this stuff. He's like, no, because he was going with off the data from the WHI,
WHI. Mm-hmm.
he was so undereducated about stuff. And then I also told him, I was like, I feel like I also need to get a DEXA scan because you know, I know that at a certain age you should do that. And he said no, because even if you have osteoporosis, the drugs for osteoporosis is really horrible for you. So he was horrible. So that's why I
Wow.
ended up trying to find a new doctor, which I ended up finding someone who is NAM certified. So she's North American Menopause Society certified and she's the FACOG. There's another certification, whatever acronym that
Mm-hmm.
means that they have to be current with all the guidelines and current research for women's health.
So how did you go from being kind of told to suck it up and just like, this is just a part of being that age,
Yeah.
to recognizing, oh, hang on, this is perimenopause, and then asking about hormone therapy and asking about those things? Like, what was the bridge there?
Mm. I think it was in searching to solve my sleep problem that I
Right.
realized that was it. And then in searching to solve my sleep problem, um, I was like, oh my, the doctor I had, he sucked. Because it just kind of, I don't know how it's like as you're trying to solve a problem, then you start reading more
Yeah.
about when this problem happens and why it happens. I think it's just in trying to solve your own, in trying to advocate for yourself. I realized that this doctor sucked and I needed a new doctor.
Yeah.
And I always say that always so surprised when people tell me about what their doctor said. I'm like, oh, you got that doctor's got to go.
Mm-hmm. We've had a few conversations with women already, and that's something that's popped up with several people that we've talked about, is this idea of like finding the right team and not
Hmm.
being afraid to say like, you don't work for me anymore, to fire a member of your healthcare team, because if you're not feeling supported, if you're not feeling seen, if you're not feeling heard, then,
Yeah,
you're just kind of like walking away with this advice to just like suck it up and deal with it. It's like, what? How
yeah.
is that a solution to this problem? Um, so how did that go then from, you've obviously tried the HRT. It sounds like you didn't stick with that. Is that
Oh,
didn't?
yeah. I tried that for the sleep issue because usually, you know how a
Oh, I
lot of
see.
doctors say, like, um, I think the guidelines are try hormone therapy if you have symptoms that
Mm-hmm.
are, bothersome to you. Like I don't get hot flashes, but for the sleep, I thought I'd give that a try to see if that helped. And then at that time, it didn't. Like I took it and I felt like it didn't do anything.
Right.
Um, but interestingly, even though I'm postmenopause, because of all the stuff we see online, I was like, so I decided to ask my current gynecologist, what are your thoughts on my already postmenopause, but I keep hearing, seeing this one orthopedic surgeon who talks about it. She's also, in her 50s and different things. And then my gynecologist like, yeah, you can try it if you want and see how it feels. Um, so she put me back on the standard, which is an estrogen patch, and you
Hmm.
take progesterone that comes in a pill form. Literally, as soon as I started that, which I had done in the past, but I only tried that for I think 3 months, and that really didn't do much for me. All of a sudden, the night I took it, I was like, oh my God, I can sleep. And since taking it, it really helps the sleep.
Right. So you were still, the sleep was still disturbed, even
Yeah, not perfect.
postmenopausally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like I was not getting insomnia, but it's like not great sleep. But now I'm literally take that and I'm sleeping.
Yeah, wow. And I think the thing that that it sort of sticks out to me the most about that part of your story is you
Hmm.
had to ask. Like you had
Oh,
to ask for that, right? Like I think,
yep.
part of the reason we want to share your story and the other women that we're speaking to is because this is the common theme, is this need to advocate, this need to
Yep.
educate ourselves so that we
Hmm.
can be asking the right questions. So I wonder
Yeah.
if, you've sort of given like some great sort of tips about things you wish you'd known, but what,
Hmm.
in terms of just that question, like what I'm 41, right? So I'm
Hmm.
not there yet. I haven't hit menopause, even though I know I could have at 41, but I have
Hmm.
not been through that. I would say I'm probably just at the beginning stages of perimenopause,
Hmm.
maybe.
Hmm.
What would you be telling me that I should be asking or looking for if I feel like I'm not getting the support that I need?
Well, if I don't feel like if you weren't getting the support you need, what I actually say to people is, so let's play, if you were in the States, I'm like, you need to go to the North American Menopause Society directory and find someone near you. And I usually tell people like, if you type in your zip code, you'll get a list, and then you would cross reference that with your insurance, see who's
Hmm.
covered, and then I kind of just check online reviews to see who's had like decent reviews. That's what I would tell you is number one, because you need a doctor um, who be like, oh yeah, what you're experiencing is very normal. These are your options. There's no right or wrong answers. I guess it's the idea of risk. Some people like, I just want to go natural. I don't want to take therapy, which is fine too. And then you can try to seek natural solutions. I think I remember even talking to Dr. Potter, the one I've interviewed in the past. She said, and the thing with some of the natural solutions, it does work for some people and it doesn't work for some people. So,
Mm.
you don't know unless you try. So that's what I would say. Yeah, for I would be like, go fire, you got to fire your doctor. Because if you're not getting the support, you're not going to get support even later because they obviously don't know enough about what you're going through now. You're not going to be supported post-menopause when your body's, already gone through changes. That means they don't know about the risks that you have in terms of your heart health, your your bone health, your uh, the losing muscle. Like they won't all that stuff. They won't be able to give you proactive assistance.
Mm. Yeah, so it's like it's not just up until the point you hit menopause that you need that support. It's like ongoing then. You need someone who's across
Yep.
that as a age group and as a experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
asked my current one, I said, should I get a DEXA scan? She goes, well, the guidelines state you don't get a DEXA scan for your bone density unless you're 65. However, you are in there's certain, what's the word? Certain, like, so are more like, Asian women are 20% of Asian women are likely to get osteoporosis. So
Mhm.
she's like, you're in the group where you're more likely to get it and also have family history. She's like, oh, so you should definitely get a DEXA scan. So, it's helpful to have someone like that. But even she's changed her view because when I asked her recently about hormone therapy, I thought she was going to say no, like, well, you're already postmenopause. But then with all the research out, I was like, can I, I was thinking about trying. She's like, yeah, why don't we try it for a month and then a month, stop, come in, and then let's see how it's going. If you have spotting, then, we need, that's not good. So I want to make sure you're not having spotting. And And I think what's interesting, and not that a man won't be as good, is I feel like because she's starting to go through perimenopause, so my doctor's probably in her early 40s and getting hot flashes, that almost changes her view on it. So it's no longer just something educational she had learned, but she's going through it herself. And I think she had mentioned she's like her symptoms are pretty bad.
That is such an important point. I think that's part of like sharing stories, right? Is it's like we need to sort of be almost like mentored by women who've been there before, and I think that
Hmm.
has lacked really, because I know growing up, my mother certainly didn't talk about menopause.
Hmm.
The women around me have really never done that. It was all just very hush hush. It was all, we don't talk about that. It's it's just what
Yep.
happens. You just suck it up and you get on with your day. Whereas it's so
Yeah.
lovely to see now a very changing landscape for that. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that you said, you didn't know that, like, you didn't know that that's what was happening. The doctors didn't
Yeah.
bring it up, despite the fact that you're in your late 40s. And now, we kind of, if we're in that world, we know, like, of course you'd be asking about that.
Yeah.
Um, do you wish you'd known more before, like
Yeah.
as a late 30s, early 40s, would you do things differently in terms of just information gathering had you known that what was coming?
Yeah, you know what? With the thing what you said about your mom, I was like, that's also why I didn't know because my mom never talked about it. So when I started going through it, when I was in the midst of it in the sleep, then I asked mom like, when did you go through menopause? And she's like, oh, and because she's old school, so she pulls out some old calendars and she was looking. She goes,
Oh,
oh, when I was 50, and I was like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me? If I'd known this, then I would, if you're a mom or a relative, someone close to you had talked about it, you'd have a sense of it. Oh, this reminds me of a story. This is this one fitness instructor that I knew. She was a little bit older than me. She was going through perimenopause, but she didn't realize it until one of her male friends said to her, because she was like short tempered and she's like, I don't understand. She's a trainer. She's like, I'm gaining weight. And he goes, oh, my mom just went through this. So he was probably in his late 30s or something like that. He's like, my mom went through that. You're going through perimenopause. She's like, what? Like he only knew because his mom was vocal, he
mm,
experienced it with his mom. But I think if you knew that, it also makes you not think you're crazy because in going through this and you talk to the doctors, they're telling you you're fine. You probably had conversations with people. I was just thinking about friends when they told their doctor, I feel like a little different, or, my period's weird. And then the doctors make them feel like they're imagining things or like that maybe you're just being a hypochondriac about stuff. So I guess if I had known about this in my 30s and 40s, I think I would be prepared. So when I start to notice changes, like, oh, it's possibly this. So if I go to the doctor or maybe my periods are changing, let me ask the doctor if this is what's happening. Because I feel like that if the doctors, maybe they're trying to figure out all this stuff, but if you kind of point them in the way, advocate for yourself, is it possible because I'm 45 and this is happening that it's this? And they were like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I think that could be that. And here are some options. Um,
yeah.
in terms of preventive, that's a good point. Whether would, because I didn't really start strength training till I was at 40. Would I have started earlier? I don't know, because you know how it is when you're younger. There's things you should be doing. Would you be doing it unless you liked doing it? Because even when I hear people talk about now it's good for your bones, I'm like, yeah, smoking's bad for you. People don't seem to stop smoking. You know, drinking's bad for you. We all drink.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that kind of behavior would have changed in terms of like if you're not into strength training, would you start earlier? Women start now in their late 40s, 50 because you're like, oh, I don't have any do-overs. I got to
This is
start.
it.
Hmm.
Was that why you started?
No, it wasn't. It was just like a time in my life when I was going through a divorce and I just started going to the gym to as someplace else to go.
Yeah.
And that's how I became interested in it. So yeah, not even I think it's for the other reasons, like just how it makes you feel empowered. But if someone told me, oh, it's good for your health, I'm like, yeah, running's good for our health. Do I like it? No.
Find
But
the
yeah,
right thing that's good for your health that you actually like doing. Yeah.
yes, that's it. That's it. Find the right thing.
Yes, I love that. And you in terms of where you're at now? Like, how do you feel now? Like, how would you sort of, I don't know, sum up your sort of
Mm.
transition through that stage?
Someone posted on one of my Instagram posts. Someone posted a comment saying, because I think it was something about one thing that you have over 50, your superpower is your strength. Like you can you absolutely can do something about that superpower. And she said had just said, "Oh, I feel like now that I'm going through perimenopause that I'm moving backwards in my fitness." And the one thing I can tell people for sure, it's like also, I don't know if anyone's ever been divorced, it's the same thing. When you come out on the other side, there is another side and it's better. So it sucks when you're going through it. Yeah, actually, it is like a divorce. You're divorcing this old part of you. But yeah, you get through the other side and it is better.
Mm,
I don't
I
have to put,
love
I don't
that.
have to, I don't put on tampons or I don't have to wear pads. It's just done.
And in terms of just you as well, like as a person, do you feel the same? Like it's like, yeah, it's better on the other side because I don't have to deal with any of that stuff. But is it
Oh,
also like, in terms of how you feel as you, is there a difference?
you know what's funny? I write in a journal and sometimes I'm like, how come it's 53 years and I feel like I still struggle psychologically with the same thing, like our own little demons. So I guess I don't know if menopause makes you feel like a different person. I think it maybe makes you much more conscious about your physicality and about your mortality.
Mm,
So you think more about that because in knowing what happens to your body, I think it's more of a consciousness. Like I'm not only past midway of my life, but there's changes that are happening that I can't get away with certain things that I could when I was younger,
mm,
and that you think about that a little bit more, maybe more deliberate in your decisions.
mm. Which can't be a bad thing.
No,
That's got to be
yeah,
a good
because
thing.
yeah, you realize it's like you back to there's no dress rehearsal. Like what you're doing now matters.
Yeah. Yeah. What a beautiful way to end. Was there anything that we missed, Tina? Anything that you're like, oh, I really wanted to say something that we've missed?
No, and I think what you said, oh, that talking about it is good, like talking about it with other girlfriends, asking our moms about it. Because my mom didn't talk about it, but when I asked her, she's like, oh yeah. Then I was like, did you have sleeping issues? She's like, sometimes I would just meditate. And I was like, why did I not know any of this? So if we have to
Yes.
we have to bring it up, we have to ask about it.
Yeah,
It's probably
yeah.
there.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I guess, the options were so different back then too, when our mothers would have been going through that. And so, um,
Mm,
you know, good
yes,
information
that's
to
right.
have. And, there's more information now to understand and to ask our healthcare team about as well. So it's a good point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you.
Erica again, and I hope you loved that chat with Tina. Next up, I am chatting with Cynthia, who is in her 40s, had her last period on her 40th birthday, and kind of knew that she might go through menopause early because that was her mum's experience, but it kind of still crept up on her anyway. And this is a really valuable, useful story about what that transition has been like for Cynthia. And in hindsight, the things that she was experiencing that now, with the value of hindsight, that she can kind of link to her perimenopause experience where she really didn't recognize that that was happening at the time. So here's that chat with Cynthia now.
My name is Cynthia. I am 40 years old, and I have just been diagnosed recently in the past, within a month, of early menopause. So I'm right there, right in the thick of it, at the very beginning of diagnosed menopause.
And 40 is young. So
Yep.
the doctor saying that that's an early menopause transition?
Yes, it is. So for me personally, and obviously for everybody it's different, but for me it is based on hereditary factors. My mum went through menopause in her late 30s, so earlier than myself, but very, very early. And they do say that it can be based on hereditary factors for some people. For me, definitely something that has occurred.
And before we hit record, you said that you knew this about your mum, but it still kind of came out of nowhere in a lot of ways. So do you want to talk a little bit about how the whole sort of story unfolded and what maybe you were feeling, what you were noticing, what sent you to the doctor, what you found difficult, all those sorts of things, wherever you want to start?
Absolutely. So for a couple of years at least, maybe 3 or 4, I've been feeling quite off, for lack of a better term. At the time, at the early stages, I can remember kind of thinking, oh, it must be lockdown. It was around that 2020, 2021 where everybody was feeling off. So I definitely didn't delve into anything further. I do remember going to the doctors, and must have been early 2021, just saying something's off, something's weird. I can't pinpoint what it is. Can I get a full blood work done? And that was not an issue. Went and had the bloods done, and my GP said, no, look, everything's in the realm of normal for you. I have had full bloods done pretty regularly up until that point, so they had a good kind of base to work from, and everything was totally fine. I had been experiencing quite a bit of hip joint pain that I myself put down to, it's getting that little bit older and maybe it's lockdown and I'm not moving in the way that my body is used to, and just kind of rationalizing that feeling in that way. Put on a little bit of weight, which is unusual for me in that particular way. I was lucky enough to still have my job throughout all of lockdown. It's quite a physical job. So I was kind of toing and froing, am I, using the downtime to the best of my ability and exercising in the way that I normally do, like I should be, and just very much rationalizing that, given that all the blood work was, in the realm of normal. And then as probably the next 18 months or so unfolded, I started getting a lot of sleep disruption. So just waking up in the night and not being able to fall back asleep again. And, again, I was just rationalizing that as potential, just a bit of stress, a bit of, trying to get the whole family back into the normal swing of things. Obviously, that whole lockdown period was such a time of immense stress that I was just thinking, well, maybe that's just my body's way of manifesting that and kind of, bringing it to my attention or needing me to kind of move on, or, just kind of rationalizing that for myself. And then again, probably in the last year, 6 months to a year from this point, the hot flashes and the night sweats. And it wasn't until the hot flashes during the day and I was like, oh, bing, 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 alarm bells going off in my brain, thinking, okay, I do know, what very little I knew up until that point about even perimenopause, let alone menopause. I was like, oh, hot flashes. Okay, something's a bit awry here. Let that go on for just a little bit of time, thinking it might be a one-off or it might be, a bit just one of those things. Chatted to a few friends of mine who had mentioned perimenopause in the past, and I was like, oh, I had actually not heard of that term before. Took it upon myself to do a bit of research and was like, okay, I can identify with a lot of things that I'm reading here. I think it's time to go to the GP. So I went to the GP about 2 months ago or so. One of the levels my GP kind of was reading through, all of the blood work, and his face did this thing. And I was like, is everything okay? And he was like, oh, yeah, no, I think we're definitely in menopause here. We'll go off and do another blood test, just in case there was some kind of extenuating circumstances or some other factors involved. Did another one, and lo and behold, no, 100% you are in menopause. I had finished, the last period that I had was literally on my 40th birthday. So happy birthday to me. This is ever since that, coupled with, every symptom that I was kind of experiencing, going to the doctors wasn't the biggest surprise. I already knew even before going to the doctors to get the results of my blood test what I was going to hear. I didn't need him to tell me, I already knew. So when he told me, I was like, all right, what's the next steps? Let's get all the information that I need. I had been doing my own research on hormone replacement therapy and bits and pieces. I wanted to be as informed as possible going into the doctor's appointment because I knew the lead. He has since referred me to a gynecologist just to get some specialty advice. And for me personally, I am going down the route of hormone replacement therapy. I haven't started yet, but I will be starting as of next week. And that's purely because of how early it has happened for me. So up until the time that I did my own research, I had no idea that the sudden crash of estrogen will impact me in terms of a cardiovascular point of view, in bone density. These are things that wasn't even on my radar. I had no idea. I thought, no, I'm not comfortable at times, but I'm actually coping okay. It's not something I need to do, until such time as I went to the specialist and he said, no, because it is so early, the role that estrogen plays in your body is really, really important. You need to protect your heart health and your bones, because it's not going to have the protection that estrogen would normally provide up until another, 10 years plus at an average stage for most women. So that's where I'm at now. A lot has kind of happened in that time, but I'm feeling very positive about it. And I guess just, being as informed as I possibly can be has really allowed me to be comfortable with it all.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the thing that really stands out for me is the way that you kind of took it upon yourself to say, okay, well, I'm going to need to have some information here. I need to know what I'm going in. I need to know what I'm asking. I need to know how I feel about certain options. And it also sounds to me like you then got the right support, because I often hear from women, it's like sometimes getting the HRT can be a real battle, or, the other way around, they don't want to take HRT and they feel pressured. So it sounds like you've had a really, I won't say lucky, because I don't think it's luck. I think it's, you worked for it, but a very fortunate combination of your willingness to do some research, to get your information sorted, to kind of know what you were facing, and then the right support to get what you need, and I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a very organized, very forward planning person professionally and, in my day-to-day life. So for me, having the information I needed to make an informed decision just was a no-brainer. I had to know absolutely all of my options and then filter out what was going to be suited to me in my situation and what was going to help me for the future.
Do you have any advice for other women listening who are like, okay, I'm not maybe that organized or forward planning? How did you go about actually finding that information? Because it's a minefield out there.
Absolutely. So just talking about it, talking to friends, to family, it was actually the best advice and the best kind of source of information that I got came from a very bizarre avenue. It was actually a colleague of my husband's. So, my husband, we are very, very open, and he will absolutely know and be able to attest to every single symptom that I've been experiencing. The poor thing has been battling through along with me. But he, felt comfortable enough to talk to a colleague of his who had mentioned something about perimenopause or menopause. I'm not sure exactly of the context there. But then the following day, she brought in an amazing book that is my little Bible. To give to me, and this book has been amazing. Not to say that other books won't. It's not necessarily the book and the information that's in it. It's just the source of information that you can get from so many different avenues that you might not expect or think about. I think has been the biggest eye opener for me. It's being confident enough to have a little bit of information behind me and think, oh, I'd like to explore a little bit more about this one little excerpt that I read that I hadn't heard about. What is this all about? What is HRT? What are the different kinds of HRT? I had no idea there were, patches and creams and, so many different things that you can have, and it's all just completely dependent on you and your situation and what you're wanting out of it, your lifestyle, just so many factors. It can be very overwhelming, but I guess having lots of different support out there and being able to discuss it willingly has led me to be able to find, what I think is right for me. And, that might change as I kind of go into it. Like I said before, I haven't physically started. So once I do actually start, I also know that I can change and make little, manipulations here or there, wherever it's needed, if that is what might be required for me.
I love that. And it goes to show you why these conversations are so important, because there might be just that one little nugget, right, that you go, oh, I need to know that. Can you read out the title of that book just for people listening?
So it's called Menopause by Devin Hall.
All right. Awesome. I don't think I've come across that one. That's great.
Yeah, it's quite up to date and very, very relevant. Just amazing. It's lovely to hear other women's experiences in there. It is backed by a doctor as well, a menopause clinic doctor. And then I think Davina McCall, I'm not personally familiar with her. I am now, because I now follow her on all the socials because she's amazing. But she's a UK TV personality.
Ah, right. Okay. The name does sound familiar, so that might be why.
Yeah.
Amazing. So thinking about what you've been through, I'm wondering if there is something that's been like, if you look back and you go, oh, that was hard, like what was the most challenging part for you, or the most challenging parts, I guess?
Honestly, probably the sleep disruption. Like I said before, my job is quite physical. If I don't have the energy to perform my job and to, make decisions on the fly and do what I need to do because of a lack of sleep, then that makes it so much harder. Also, I hate disrupting other people's sleep. And obviously my husband, who I mentioned before, is very, very familiar with everything, that all of the goings on for me. I hate disrupting his sleep. And I feel like the knock-on effect of that one little thing, me not being able to get to sleep or tossing and turning or being uncomfortable, really does impact lots of avenues, lots of different aspects of my life. I feel like that's the hardest thing to, even now, I'm still, going through that. There's not really a quick switch solution that I've come across so far. Let me know if you do. That to kind of combat that.
Yes, and I can imagine we have kids of not dissimilar ages, and I can imagine that has a knock-on effect there as well, of just like your capacity to parent, right? It's hard.
Absolutely. The irritability creeps into it as well, which I'm told also is quite a symptom of perimenopause and menopause. So that definitely doesn't help when you haven't had the sleep that your body requires. And then it's the joint pain as well, that, again, if your body isn't getting the sleep that it needs, is, a bit more niggly, and it's
snowballs.
Time sometimes.
Yeah. So what would you've sort of talked about how hearing other women's stories has been really important to you, and I'm so grateful for you sharing yours for the same reason. If there was a piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice that you could give to other women, perhaps they're in that perimenopause stage and they're listening to this thinking, oh, I have a bit of something like that. Is there, some wisdom that you would share with those women that would perhaps just, help them get to where you've gotten just that little bit quicker because they've got the information that you've shared?
Yeah, I would just say to trust yourself. If you've got to a stage of, 35, 40, 45, whatever your age is, your body. That little voice in the back of your mind that says, oh, something's not right, or my body's not behaving now like it used to, or whatever it might be. Yes, it could be absolutely attributed to just normal aging process, and you don't need to give it a second thought, or maybe, just maybe, you do need to give it a second thought. And thankfully we live in a country where medical advice is very accessible for most people. Definitely go and see your GP, have that conversation. And then again, if you're not happy with that conversation, nobody says that you can't go and get a second opinion on just a conversation. It doesn't cost anything to get a second opinion in that way, just to yourself and back what what you know about yourself, but nobody knows you better than you know yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It made me think just then when you said about, maybe part of it is the normal aging process. Isn't it funny how when we kind of get past 35 and we're kind of moving towards 40 and maybe we're 40 in our 40s, we're very willing to be like, oh, my joint pain might be a little bit because I'm kind of getting older, but we don't think, could it be perimenopause?
Not for
Even
a
though it's the right age, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny that you say that, because I can pretty much pinpoint the exact moment I was like, hold on, this is all connected. I didn't even think of it for years, for actually years. I did not even make the association until I started to become that little bit more informed. And then I was like, okay, I see.
Yeah. And what you said about the stress, like, I think, oh my gosh, that those lockdown years and all of that stuff, of course you would just think, oh, maybe I'm just under so much pressure. And then, just our lives in general now are so much more demanded upon. So it would be so easy for it to slip through the cracks. So I think your advice there is so fitting, of just like, even if all of that stuff's going on, your body.
Yeah, just back yourself.
Yeah, it's good advice in general.
Can be played across many aspects of your own life.
Exactly. Amazing. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I'm trying to think. I don't think so.
No?
Just to be kind to yourself. Even if you're not necessarily going through perimenopause or menopause, half the population is going to. You're going to know many people. Just be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and just be open enough to have that unbiased conversation with somebody else. It might just be enough, to prompt someone else, or to prompt your sister, your auntie, anyone to go and just be a little bit more informed and get potentially help that they might need, or just reach a level of understanding and acceptance too, I think is really important.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Cynthia. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
So a huge thank you to Cynthia for sharing her story with us. In this episode, we have got one more women's story to share with you, and that is my conversation with Natalya. Now, Natalya is in her 30s, and she went through the menopause transition in her 20s as a result of a medical procedure to help manage endometriosis. Now, Natalya's story is different in the sense that she is so much younger than most of the women that we've spoken to who have been through that menopause transition. And I think this is a really important story to be sharing for anyone who is in a similar position. And she's facing different challenges as a result of going through that transition so early and having the immediacy of that, right? She talks about the fact that she literally overnight essentially goes into menopause. And so she's very generously sharing her story with us. And we're going to go to that chat right now.
My name's Natalya. I'm 32 years old, and I'm joining the conversation today because I'm in menopause, and I went into menopause overnight because I had surgery, and so a little bit different to how other people experience it.
So, Natalya, obviously that's a huge thing to have gone through, to literally overnight be not even perimenopausal, I would imagine, at 32, potentially not. And this was a few years ago, was it, that this happened?
Yeah, so this was 2021.
Okay, so you were still in your late 20s.
Yeah, I was 28 years old.
Yeah, so very unlikely to have been in perimenopause. And then overnight you go through something that lands you in menopause very young. What do you want to tell us about that transition and how that's been for you and how you felt and, the emotional side of things? I know that's a lot of questions all wrapped up into one, but I want you just to start wherever you'd like to start and share whichever pieces feel, shareable for you at the moment.
All right, cool. Well, hopefully I don't jump around too much. You can keep me on track as needed. But for me, I really struggled with a number of really complicated health issues and had those from quite early in life, so childhood and teenager, adolescence. And two of the conditions that I was facing was endometriosis and adenomyosis. And so not everyone knows what they are, but they're conditions where the lining of your uterus can kind of create some abnormal growths and can make its way around other parts of the body as well. So it can end up on the outside of other organs like your ovaries and your bowel, but it can also travel as far as the brain. So they're tricky conditions that most women don't get a diagnosis for. So the average diagnosis time is 7 to 10 years in Australia. And that was definitely my experience. And so by the time you get information about what's going on for you, the symptoms can already be really quite debilitating and disabling. And that was very much my story. So by the time I was in my late 20s, I'd already been thinking for a solid 10 years that a hysterectomy was in my future. And obviously that's a pretty radical thing to put your body through, and a pretty big physical trauma as well as an emotional one to go through. But for me, it was the best decision amongst a really bad situation. So for me, I was really hoping to gain a bit more functionality and be able to just live a normal life and do things that a lot of people take for granted. So things like going to work, studying, being able to exercise and move my body was something that I lost. Being able to just leave the house and go and spend time with friends and do things that you love, go on holidays, spend time with your animals, spend time in nature. Those were all things that were really getting stripped away from me as the years went on. And so when I was 28, in the middle of COVID in Melbourne, amongst all of that craziness, I had my surgery. So I had ovaries removed, uterus, fallopian tube, cervix, the whole lot. And I was pretty well informed for the medical side of things, and I was really not well informed for how my life was going to change really dramatically overnight. So for me physically, that was a big shock to my system. My body went from being a 28-year-old body to being in this completely different life stage, and needing to put different things back into my body, like synthetic hormone replacement was something that I needed to do because of my age. And yeah, during that time in COVID, it was really difficult for most people to be accessing supports and medical care and treatment and things like that. So it was a really difficult time to be going through that. And it definitely has taken a few years since to recover from such a brutal experience physically and emotionally, and be able to build back and create the life that I really want to have.
I'm really struck by how significant that timing is in terms of like that was already a really hard time, but it sounds like you were kind of faced with the hard kind of decision to change things, which was going to still be hard, or the hard decision of keeping things as they were. So I imagine that felt like a tricky space to be in. And what I'm curious to know more about, lots of things, but one of them is this sort of notion that you had lost a lot prior, you know, the ability to just kind of like live a normal life had been stripped from you. So was your experience then post hysterectomy of gaining back, or was there more loss in the mix? And it sounds like maybe there was a bit of both, but do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, what was surprising in terms of that very abrupt transition that you weren't prepared for, and I guess the loss around that?
Yes. So maybe a little bit of context is helpful, but in Australia, hysterectomy is one of the most common medical treatments for women, which is a bit
Wow.
scary to think about. And we jumped to hysterectomy for lots and lots of different medical conditions, not just the ones that I've come from, but it's a really common treatment that people go through, or attempted treatment. And for me, my health situation was in such dire straits that I was willing to do pretty much anything at that stage, and had already gone through some other really radical treatments without much success, and really got to the stage where I thought, it can't get worse than this. What I didn't know was that it could actually get worse than what it was. So for my body, the process was incredibly difficult. And there was a lot of drastic changes that are not talked about amongst medical professionals. It's also not even something that's really talked about amongst women who have had hysterectomy and gone straight into menopause. And so it was really challenging trying to go through a medical treatment to gain a bit more functionality, and live a normal life, but actually have the opposite happen, where my functioning just absolutely plummeted. And so one of the things that I'd love for people to know, if they're in a similar boat and looking at possibly doing this for themselves, is really go and seek out stories from women who have done this and it's gone terribly wrong. So I know that sometimes we don't want to read the horror stories because we don't want to psych ourselves out. There are heaps of people who go through these procedures, and it's very helpful for them in different ways. So definitely read those stories and connect with those people. But I really encourage people to also, look at both sides as best they can, and speak to as many women that have been through this themselves as possible, beforehand as well, and after, because I think that you need the support from people who have been there and understand. So in terms of some of the disruptions that I dealt with, I guess I haven't gone through the natural cycles of womanhood that a lot of people do. So I've gone from, instead of maiden to mother to matriarch, I feel like I've skipped a really big section, and overnight went maiden to matriarch. And a lot of people in menopause report changes in mood and difficulties with their emotions. And those mood changes can be happening so quickly and so without warning sometimes, that it's hard to sort of pick up on what's happening. And I felt very much similarity between going into adolescence and all of the physical and the mental and emotional changes that you get hit with. It's been a little bit of a similar situation, actually, transitioning into this menopausal stage of life. So everything is disrupted, absolutely everything, from sleep to emotions to connecting with others, moving your body and exercising, your purpose and your work and reason for being. Every single aspect of your life, I feel, is really impacted. For me in particular, the hormonal balance has always been really tricky. And one of the tough things is that our brain needs hormones to be in the right balance for us to be functioning properly. So you're not able to sleep if your hormones are not where they should be. You're definitely not going to be able to digest food and break down food and repair your body and heal from things like surgeries if your hormones are not where they need to be. Your brain literally won't be able to do the basic normal functioning skills that you are used to, like focus and memory, if your hormones are not where they should be. So for me, I really struggled with processing any sort of information. So reading, writing, speaking, and that can be a really isolating situation to be in.
Mm. Yes, I can only imagine how hard that must have been, feeling unprepared for that. And I mean, I don't know how you do prepare for that, but I guess feeling under informed about that off the back of already being like it can't get worse. I mean, the emotional toll of that must have been huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting now in hindsight, connecting with a lot of women who have had really significant life changes when they go into menopause, um, or in my case, have a surgery that leads them there. It really changes your ability to show up as a partner, as a friend, in your workplace. Yeah, just all of the different facets that make you who you are.
Mm.
It's really difficult to show up in those spaces, um, and so I think at a time where you need a lot of support, you can also be dealing with a lot of strained relationships around you. And I've definitely witnessed that in the older women in my life as they've transitioned through menopause as well. Um, it can be really difficult to connect with people when you're just not feeling your best or feel so different to how you've ever felt before.
Mm. It strikes me too that I think this is changing, but it strikes me that there's typically not been a lot of compassion around that stage of life either, that there's that kind of um, stereotype almost that surrounds it. And I think it's so damaging. Um, yeah, and it becomes the woman's responsibility to just like pull it together, right? And it sounds like it's almost impossible to do so just by sheer will. So I'm curious what you found to be the most helpful or the most supportive. Like where did you go or what did you do in order to get through that time? And I'm not making the assumption that you're completely through it, because I understand that it isn't quite that simple, but compared to where you were and where you are now, what have you found or what are you finding to be the most helpful, supportive resources, tools, connections that have helped you actually like navigate that and get somewhere else with it potentially?
So for me, it's been really interesting learning about how the Western world views womanhood and the life stages that we go through versus how Eastern culture looks at similar things. So for me, I'm half Australian, half Croatian. And depending on what culture you look at around the world, there are really different ways of managing and viewing different life transitions. And so that's been incredibly helpful, I think, to zoom out a little bit and go, wow, we don't have to get stuck in this medical model um, for something that women have been navigating since the beginning of time,
Mm-hmm.
and also looking into the particularly oral traditions of women passing on their wisdom has been really interesting for me, because it gave me a very different lens to look at this time of life. So that's been really, really helpful and supportive. And I've also looked at nature connection has always been really important for me, but that's really been a saving grace, I think. So going out into nature, spending time in the sunshine, spending time by water, um, moving my body in ways that are enjoyable and not. So for me, I hate the gym. I've always hated the gym, but I've always been really sporty and love to be doing stuff.
Mm.
And so when I was at my most unwell, that looked like just going outside and sitting around green things and sitting in the sunshine, and trusting that while I couldn't sort of see the end,
Mm.
that there was light at the end of the tunnel, and to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So definitely a lot of quiet time and a lot of time in nature and time in sunlight. Something else that was really important for me to do, um, which is not everybody's path, but I really looked at my nutrition and I looked at what I was putting into my body. And I had been, for many years, I had taken a plant-based dietary approach, and I flipped that completely and I went down an animal-based diet, and that's been incredibly helpful as well. And then I would say having different kinds of relationships has been really, really useful. So my partner and I have been together for about 12 years, and he's just been in it with me the whole way through. And what I found was that this was a really interesting time of self-reflection where I was asking myself what I wanted my life to look like, what I wanted my days to look like, what I wanted my relationships to look like. And so I was seeking out women who had either been through similar situations and had that wisdom to share, or could just resonate with my experience, and also women who did things a little bit differently to the mainstream message. So women that really invest a lot of time into having like a very slow and intentional way of being, who really value spending time in nature and connecting with other people on a really deep level. I wanted to move away from the sort of intense hustle bustle, just that really intense mainstream way of living that I think most of us have come from.
Yeah.
Or are still in to some degree. I think that they would be the key things for me.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting. It echoes what I've heard quite a few women say, whether they've gone through, menopause, in the different ways that we can go through that, and whatever stage of life they were at. That is one consistent thing that I've heard, is the reevaluation of like what matters to me. And that seems to be really a significant part of that transition of going, well, hang on, what I'm going to live my life for me, and what matters to me, and what do I care about? And so it's interesting that that is a common thread. And I'm wondering how different that feels for you. Like, do you feel that sort of on the other side, I guess, of that menopause transition, do you have more clarity around what matters to you, like because you ask those questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
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 And I think that leads you to connecting with other people who are asking those questions as well, because sometimes it's just wanting to have the conversations with people who are thinking similar things, that can be really, really supportive, I think, because we all take in information and analyze it and perceive it differently, and then take action based off that. But even just being around people who are asking similar questions has been made such a dramatic difference. And now that I'm, a little bit further away from that situation, I feel a lot more grounded and a lot more clear on the direction that I'm moving in, which is really good feeling to have after so many years of sort of upheaval and instability.
Yeah, and it sounds like the surgery itself then created a fairly significant amount of time of transition for you too.
Yeah, I think we really we really don't tackle hormones very well in general.
Mm,
And in my case, I didn't have a gradual change in my
yeah.
hormone levels and a balancing out in my body. It was very severe and happened overnight. And so when that happens, like your body really does go into panic distress mode and your hair will fall out and you start having allergic reactions to things that never really bothered you before. And, you know, you walk into a room and you can't remember why you're there. And then at night, you can't sleep because your body's just having these hot flushes and sweats.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, so there are all of these experiences that are really, really tricky that there's not, you don't feel very empowered in that moment uh, to deal with. And particularly if you're trying to live a pretty normal, busy life, and you've got lots of commitments and lots of responsibilities, there's not a lot of time and space to actually cope with these big physical changes that you're
mm,
going through.
yeah. Have you persisted? I sort of feel like I'm reading between the lines here, but you've obviously had to persist with the hormone replacement. I
Mm.
wonder what you would, because I've heard this before from women where it's like, you know, some women seem to get the HRT dose and kind of, you know, all of the stuff kind of like they get it right the first time, or the doctors just somehow get a fluke and they, you know, it seems to work from the get-go. Doesn't sound like that was the case for you. And I wonder if you would have any advice around like advocating for yourself and how you did that and what you found helpful, because I think that's somewhere that I know that's something that Anita and I talk about a lot, is this idea of like you have to back yourself. And so I wonder if you want to just tell me a little bit about what that process has been like to kind of get to have the persistence, I guess, to get to the point where you're like, okay, this feels a little bit more like what I need.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience with HRT has been pretty brutal. Um, it was not, yeah, and I'm still 3.5 years on. I'm still trying to get my HRT right. Um, and I wish I was one of those lucky people that just seem to get all the benefits and none of the difficulties straight away. But what I would say is that we we don't have a lot of good science and we don't have a lot of good research around women's health in general, and particularly life stages like menopause. And so I would really encourage any women that are looking into this for themselves, know going in that you don't need to take a medical model approach. Know going in that you're going to hear um, you're going to hear some common themes come up from the doctors that you see, but that's not the only lens to look at things through. And if you keep searching for answers, you'll find them. They're out there, even though it's a difficult path.
Mm.
For me, on the topic of hormone replacement therapy, I would really encourage people, if they're having difficulty with it, to consider stepping into more of like a functional medicine realm, um, and look at the type of hormone replacement that you're being offered and taking. Because I know for me, I've had really, really bad reactions to all of the standard medications that are available. Um, and I really felt that I wasn't being heard and wasn't being listened to and was being labeled when I would go back to my medical team and say, this is just not working and I'm having these unmanageable symptoms as a result. For me, I decided to go down the route of going through a compound pharmacy where you basically take out all of the fillers and the extra bulking up products that go into a lot of medications, and you just work with the particular hormone that you're wanting to get into your system. And for me, that made a really, really enormous difference with how my body was tolerating it. So I know so many of us are told by our doctors or believe for ourselves that we have issues with the hormones themselves. And I just want to put it out there that that might not be it. It might be that there are some other agents and other filler products going into your medications that might be really upsetting the balance in your body, especially at such like a vulnerable time of change when everything's kind of up and down in your system. A lot of women, that's the time where, you know, they get secondary diagnoses for things like allergy type problems. It's the time where a lot of women get the ADHD diagnosis because their brain's just not working. So there's a lot of symptoms that can pop up, but I really encourage people to go back and look at the hormonal side of things and getting that right.
Yeah, gosh, it sounds like if we haven't learned to be our own advocates yet, that, that menopause transition is certainly going to put that skill to the test. I think that's one thing that keeps coming up every single time that we speak to people. It's like, yeah, you gotta back yourself. You've got to, trust your body, trust what you're experiencing, because you're the only one in there, right? You're the only one with that information. So thank you so much for your willingness to share your story and, to kind of go into some of the nitty-gritty with me. I really do appreciate that. And I know how beneficial that will be for other women to hear, whether they are, in a similar circumstance to you. I don't think we can overstate the importance of connection, and that's why we're having these conversations. So thank you so much. So there we have it, 3 amazing women's stories, and I just want to extend my absolute gratitude to all of the women who have shared stories with us over these last couple of episodes. I know that both Anita and myself are just so grateful for the time, for the generosity, for the vulnerability that you shared. And thank you to those of you listening for holding the space for those women, all over the place as we listen and we share and we connect with these women's stories. That's a really powerful thing. So next episode on Midlife Unfiltered, Anita and I are chatting with another woman, getting another woman's story around midlife. And our chat is with Katie Abbott, who is a composer, and she is sharing with us about her midlife transition and really around her role and how she has seen herself as a pattern interrupter in midlife. And I know you're going to absolutely love that episode. So stay tuned for that and so much more coming up on Midlife Unfiltered. Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.